The sterile hum of Vanderbilt University Hospital clung to Alara like a shroud, suffocating. Outside, the spring air whispered of new beginnings, carrying the sweet scent of blooming dogwoods, and sunlight danced on the glass facade. But none of it reached her. Her husband, Ethan Vance, lay beyond those walls, a phantom in the intensive care unit, fighting for his life against an enemy they never saw coming. People drifted by, their conversations soft, ordinary. For a fleeting second, Alara yearned to be one of them, just another woman enjoying a warm afternoon, laughing about dinner plans or garden woes. But that woman was gone. Her world had narrowed to a hospital room and the relentless, mechanical beeping of machines. Ethan had always been an immovable force. He was the kind of man who would sculpt beauty from raw timber for 12 hours, then return home, still radiating energy, to cook dinner and genuinely ask about her day. His smile, a crooked, comforting curve, had a way of convincing her that everything would be all right, even when life's burdens felt crushing. He was her anchor, her safe harbor, and now, watching him fade, Alara felt herself sinking into quicksand. Only 6 months ago, they'd believed they had a lifetime. They'd whispered dreams of vacations they couldn't yet afford, a bigger house for the children they still yearned for, maybe even a scruffy dog. Then, one night, Ethan came home, pallid and utterly drained. He'd brushed it off as a long day, but the exhaustion clung to him, deepening into unexplained bruises and nights where he gasped for air. The doctor's words had felt like a foreign language, autoimmunoplastic anemia. His own body was turning traitor, systematically dismantling the very factory that made his blood. Without a stem cell transplant, they'd said, there was little hope. Alara had forced herself to be strong for him, holding his hand, whispering promises of recovery. But every night, alone in the bathroom, her sobs were muffled by a towel. Because Alara knew something Ethan didn't. He had no family. Raised in foster care, he'd never known his parents, never even knew if he had siblings. And without close relatives, the odds of finding a compatible donor match were astronomically low. They joined the National Registry, but the doctors had been brutally honest. The wait could stretch to months, years even. Ethan didn't have that kind of time. Earlier today, when Dr. Aris pulled Alara aside, his words had gutted her. Alara, we are running out of options. If we don't find a compatible donor soon, he hadn't needed to finish the sentence. She knew what he meant. Tears streamed down her face, leaving a cold trail. She was a nurse. Her life was dedicated to healing others. Yet, she couldn't heal the man she loved most. She thought of their little wooden house on the edge of Nashville, the rocking chair Ethan had crafted for her on their first anniversary, the framed note by the kitchen door that read, "You are my always." The thought of losing him was unbearable, yet deep down, a treacherous voice whispered that she might have to prepare for it. She hated herself for the thought, but grief had already begun to coil its icy tendrils around her heart. Then, as if fate itself had heard her silent scream, she overheard something. A fragment of a casual remark, a whisper that would change everything. Their story began on a night when life felt light and ordinary, long before hospital rooms and medical charts consumed their days. Alara had just finished her final nursing exam, exhausted but exhilarated. Her friends had dragged her to a little cafe in downtown Nashville, an unassuming brick building with worn wooden floors and the pervasive scent of roasted coffee. She remembered him walking in like it was yesterday, a paper bag of hardware clutched in one hand, his jeans dusted with sawdust, an aura of quiet confidence that made her look twice. He'd smiled shyly when their eyes met and asked if the seat across from her was taken. They talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, his passion for crafting furniture, her dream of working in pediatrics, their shared aversion to olives, and their mutual love for peach cobbler. When he truly laughed, his eyes crinkled at the corners, and something within Alara just knew. From that night on, Ethan became a constant. He appeared with small, thoughtful surprises, a jar of honey from a roadside market, a wildflower bouquet wrapped in butcher paper, a new book because he'd remembered her mentioning it. He had a way of infusing the mundane with magic. 2 years later, they stood beneath an ancient oak tree, exchanging vows. Alara wore her mother's pearl earrings, and Ethan, never one to hide emotion, cried openly when he saw her walking down the aisle. They moved into a small wooden fixer-upper on the edge of town, a project Ethan insisted he could handle himself. And he did, spending weekends sanding floors, building shelves, even crafting that rocking chair for their anniversary. It still sat on their porch, a silent witness to countless evenings spent side by side, watching fireflies dance in the Tennessee twilight. Life felt full, even if it wasn't perfect. The only thing missing was children. They started trying soon after the wedding, expecting it to be easy. But month after month, nothing. Doctors said Alara's body wasn't cooperating, that natural conception might be impossible. They tried treatments, hormone shots, endless appointments, and eventually IVF. The first attempt failed. So did the second. With each negative test, Alara felt a little more broken, as if her body had betrayed them both. But Ethan never once blamed her. He held her on those nights when she cried until her head ached, whispering, "Alara, this doesn't change how much I love you." He even suggested adoption, talking excitedly about how many children needed homes, how they could still have a family. Alara wanted to embrace the idea, truly, but a part of her still longed to see a child with his blue eyes and that crooked half-smile he wore when he was trying not to laugh. One day, after another failed cycle, she collapsed into his arms, apologizing through tears. "You deserve a wife who can give you a family," she choked out. He gently tilted her chin, making her meet his gaze. "Alara, I didn't marry you for children. I married you for you. You are my family." That was Ethan, steadfast, kind, selfless. He could have been angry, resentful, distant. Instead, he chose love every single time. Looking back, Alara realized how those struggles had prepared them. The nights they'd held each other through disappointment, the dreams they'd reshaped together, they became the blueprint for surviving the storm that was about to hit. Because when Ethan fell ill, their world collapsed. And yet, even lying there, weak and pallid, he still tried to be the strong one. He joked about hospital food, teased her about worrying too much, and told her they'd get through this, just like everything else. But deep down, Alara knew this was different. This was life and death. And she wasn't ready to imagine a life without him. It started so quietly they barely noticed. Ethan would come home from his workshop earlier, brushing off his fatigue with a smile. Just tired. Long day, that's all. But the tiredness didn't fade. It grew heavier, like an invisible weight pulling him down. Then came the bruises. Small at first, like he'd bumped into a workbench. Soon, they appeared without reason, purple blotches blooming across his arms and legs. One night, Alara woke to the sound of him gasping for breath, clutching his chest. The nurse in her screamed. She begged him to see a doctor. When he finally agreed, she expected something simple, a vitamin deficiency, stress. Instead, they were directed to a hematology specialist who ordered every test imaginable. Alara would never forget the moment the results came back. The doctor, his face too serious, his words deliberate, sat them down. "Ethan, you have aplastic anemia. It's rare and, in your case, severe. Your bone marrow is shutting down." The air left Alara's lungs. Ethan just nodded, calm as always. "What do we do?" The answer was both simple and impossible. You need a bone marrow transplant. Without it, your body can't produce blood cells. But the process requires a donor match, ideally a sibling or close relative. Alara looked at Ethan, silently begging him to say there was someone, but she already knew. Ethan had grown up in foster care, bounced from home to home, never knowing his parents or any siblings. He had no family tree, no one to call. They signed up for the National Donor Registry immediately, but the doctors were honest. It could take months, maybe longer, to find a compatible stranger. Ethan didn't have that kind of time. The disease moved fast. He became translucent, his strong hands trembling when he tried to pick up a cup. The man who once built furniture until midnight now struggled to walk across the living room. Even then, he tried to protect Alara. He joked about the hospital gowns, about how he'd always wanted to try the bald look once his hair started thinning for medication. At night, when he thought she was asleep, she could hear him whispering prayers, asking for strength, not for himself, but for her. Alara would hold his hand, force a smile, and say, "We're going to beat this." But inside, she was terrified. Terrified of losing him. Terrified of an empty house. Terrified of a life she hadn't planned for. One afternoon, after another round of transfusions, Dr. Eris pulled her aside. His voice was gentle, but carried the weight of finality. "Alara, we are running out of options. If a match doesn't come through soon, I'm afraid he doesn't have much time." Alara nodded, unable to speak, tears burning behind her eyes. She had seen death before. Working as a nurse, you faced it more often than most. But nothing prepared her for the thought of losing Ethan. She walked outside into the hospital courtyard, desperate for air, for anything that could steady her. That's when she heard it. 2 hospital employees were on a break nearby, talking casually, unaware she could hear them. "You know that guy in ICU, Vance? Ethan Vance? He looks just like this guy who lives out in Pine Hollow. I swear it's like looking at the same person." Alara's heart stopped. Pine Hollow, a small mountain town, just a couple of hours away. Could it be nothing more than coincidence? Or could it mean Ethan had family out there, someone who might be a match? For the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Fragile, trembling hope, but hope nonetheless. She stood frozen, their words echoing. "He looks just like this guy who lives out in Pine Hollow." Pine Hollow was a small mountain town, about a 2-hour drive east of Nashville. Alara had only been there once during nursing school for a community outreach program. It was the kind of place where life slowed down, where people still waved at strangers. Could it be a coincidence? People resembled each other all the time, but something inside her whispered otherwise. Ethan had grown up in foster care, abandoned at birth, with no information about his family. He had spent years wondering if there was someone out there with his same eyes, his same crooked smile, someone who might actually share his blood. She remembered the time he almost tried to find his biological parents. They'd been sitting on their porch one summer night when he admitted, "Sometimes I think about looking for them, but what if they didn't want me then? Why would they want me now?" His voice had carried a quiet ache she hadn't known how to soothe. So he'd buried the thought, focused on building a life with her, choosing to believe that family was what you built, not what you were born into. But now, family wasn't just an abstract idea. It could mean the difference between life and death. That night, Alara barely slept. She sat at Ethan's bedside, holding his hand while the machines hummed softly. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow but steady. "I'm going to fix this, Ethan," she whispered. "I don't care what it takes." The next morning, she marched into work and filed for emergency leave. Her boss, bless her heart, didn't ask many questions. She knew Ethan's situation and just hugged Alara before signing the form. Alara packed a bag, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and fierce determination. She didn't even know the man's name, only that he lived in Pine Hollow and apparently looked like her husband. She had no plan, just a single photograph of Ethan on her phone and a fragile thread of fate. Before leaving, she went to Ethan's room. He was awake, smiling faintly when he saw her. "You look like you're about to take on the world," he teased, his voice weak but warm. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I might be." He tried to ask more, but she stopped him. "Don't worry about it, okay? Just rest. I'll be back before you know it." She wanted to tell him everything about Pine Hollow, about the man who might be his family, but she couldn't risk giving him hope, only to break it if it turned out to be nothing. The drive out of Nashville felt surreal. The highway gave way to winding country roads, fields of early spring wildflowers, and eventually the rolling hills of Pine Hollow. As she crossed the old wooden bridge into town, Alara whispered a silent prayer. "Please let this be real. Let there be someone out there who can save him." She parked near a small general store and stepped out, clutching her phone. The people here moved at a different pace, Farmers loading feed sacks, an elderly woman sweeping her porch, kids riding bicycles on dusty streets. Every face Alara saw, she studied carefully, searching for some trace of Ethan's sharp jawline, his eyes, anything. She stopped at the general store and approached the clerk, a man in his 50s with kind, knowing eyes. "Excuse me, I'm looking for someone. I don't know his name, but people say he looks like this." She showed him Ethan's photo. The man's eyes widened immediately. "You're probably talking about Caleb Thorne. Lives out by the cornfields on County Road 6. Yeah, he does look like that." Alara's heart skipped. "Could you give me directions?" He did, and she thanked him, her voice barely a whisper, before heading back to her car. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she drove toward what might be the answer to every desperate prayer she'd whispered in the past few months. She didn't know if this Caleb Thorne was actually related to Ethan, but she knew one thing for sure. She was about to find out. The road to County Road 6 was little more than a stretch of cracked pavement winding through tall pines and open fields. A soft drizzle began to fall, the kind that seemed to hang in the air like a fine mist, clinging to her windshield and blurring the edges of the horizon. Alara slowed as she spotted the mailbox with faded white letters, Thorne. The house behind it was old, weathered, surrounded by a field of corn stubble and muddy tire tracks. A rusted swing creaked in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. For a moment, Alara sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, her pulse thrumming in her ears. What if she was wrong? What if she was about to knock on a stranger's door and make a fool of herself? But then she thought of Ethan, his frail hand clutching hers, his smile trying to hide the fear in his eyes. And she stepped out of the car. The wooden steps groaned as she climbed them. She knocked lightly at first, then harder when no one answered. After a moment, the door creaked open. A man stood there, taller than she expected, broad-shouldered but slightly stooped, with dark blonde hair falling loosely over his forehead. His eyes. Alara's breath caught. They were the same piercing blue as Ethan's, the same shape, the same intensity. He blinked at her. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep, cautious, with a rough edge, like someone who didn't entertain strangers often. Alara held out her phone with trembling hands, showing him the picture of Ethan. This is my husband. His name is Ethan Vance. People said, you look like him." The man frowned, staring at the screen for what felt like forever. His expression shifted, confusion, disbelief, and something almost painful. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I'll be damned." He looked at her again, softer now. "Who are you?" "Alara. I'm his wife." He stepped aside. "You better come in." The inside of the house was humble. Wood floors, mismatched furniture, the faint smell of coffee and motor oil. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." You're saying he's your husband?" Alara nodded, clutching her bag in her lap. "He's in the hospital. He's very sick. He needs a bone marrow transplant. They said he has no family. But then I heard about you, and I had to come." Her voice broke. The man, Caleb Thorne, as Alara quickly learned, sat opposite her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He looked at the photo again, shaking his head slowly. I think he might be my brother." Those words hit Alara with a force that stole her breath. "Your brother?" Caleb nodded. "Our mom, she wasn't much of one, to be honest. She had a lot of kids, most with different fathers. When I was little, she had another baby, a boy. She said she wasn't keeping him. Signed papers at the hospital and left him there. I was too young to do anything, but I never forgot. Always wondered what happened to him." He rubbed his face with both hands, his voice cracking. "I didn't even know his name until now." Alara's eyes blurred with tears. Ethan's been looking for family his whole life. He thought he was completely alone. Caleb's jaw tightened, and he stood abruptly. "I'll do it. The transplant. I don't even need to think about it." You tell him that. "He's my brother. If there's a chance I can help him live, of course I will." He walked into the kitchen and returned with his truck keys. "When do we go?" For a second, Alara just stared at him, stunned by how quickly he'd made the decision. In her head, she had imagined convincing him, explaining the situation, maybe even begging, but there was none of that. It was like he had been waiting for this moment without even knowing it. They left Pine Hollow that evening, the rain now heavier, streaking the windshield as Caleb drove behind Alara in his old pickup truck. Her chest felt lighter for the first time in months. There was still fear, there was always fear, but now there was also something else. Hope that felt solid, like ground under her feet. When they arrived at Vanderbilt University Hospital, Alara led Caleb through the sterile white halls to Ethan's room. Ethan was awake, propped up by pillows, his skin pale, but his eyes brightening when he saw Alara, then narrowing in confusion when they shifted to Caleb. For a long moment, no one said a word. Ethan's mouth opened slightly, like he was staring at a ghost. Caleb stepped forward, emotion thick in his voice. "I think I'm your brother." Ethan blinked, tears welling instantly. "My brother." Alara stood there, watching two men, strangers a day ago, brothers by blood, lock eyes as if recognizing something only they could feel. Ethan reached out a shaking hand, and Caleb took it firmly. "We'll talk later," Caleb said softly. "But right now, I'm here to save your life." Caleb's test results came back faster than Alara expected. The doctors wanted to expedite everything because Ethan's condition was deteriorating quickly. When the hematologist stepped into the waiting room with that soft, relieved smile, Alara's knees nearly gave out. "He's a strong match," she said. "One of the best we've seen in a while." Alara turned to Caleb, tears brimming in her eyes. "Did you hear that? You're a match. You can save him." Caleb's expression wavered between shock and determination. "Then let's do it. When do we start?" That night, Ethan and Caleb finally had time to sit together. Alara stayed just outside the doorway for the first few minutes, giving them privacy, but she could still hear their voices, low, emotional, hesitant at first, then warmer as minutes passed. Ethan's voice broke as he said, "I used to dream about having a brother. I thought it was stupid, like dreaming about a house you'll never live in. But here you are, real." Caleb chuckled quietly, though his voice was thick. "Guess life had other plans, huh?" "I'm sorry I wasn't there, Ethan. I didn't even know." "You don't have to be sorry," Ethan said, gripping Caleb's hand with surprising strength for someone so weak. "You're here now. That's all that matters." When Alara stepped back into the room, Ethan looked at her with damp eyes and whispered, "I have a brother. I'm not alone." Alara kissed his forehead and smiled, whispering back, "You never were." The procedure was scheduled for the next morning. Alara barely slept, her mind racing through every possible outcome. Caleb was calm, even joking with the nurses as they prepped him for the donation. "Never thought I'd be giving my bone marrow to a guy I met yesterday," he teased, then looked at Ethan and added softly, "But I'm glad it's him." The hours crawled by, but eventually it was done. The transplant went smoothly, and Ethan was moved to a recovery room while the new stem cells began their life-saving work. Alara sat by his bed, holding his hand, feeling the warmth returning to his skin. For the first time in months, his face had a hint of color. Caleb came in later, looking tired but content, and Ethan reached out weakly to clasp his brother's arm. "You just gave me a second chance," he whispered. Caleb smiled. "Guess we're even now. You gave me family." Alara couldn't stop the tears this time. For months, she had carried so much fear, so much loneliness. But now, sitting there between these two men who had found each other against all odds, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in so long. Peace. Outside the window, Nashville's skyline shimmered under the late evening lights. Alara thought about how quickly life could shift from despair to hope, from loss to gain. Sometimes in just a matter of days. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe deeply and believe that Ethan might actually survive, and that they had been given a gift far greater than they had asked for. The days following the transplant felt like stepping into a new world, one where hope finally outweighed fear. Ethan's body responded well. Each morning, Alara would watch for the tiniest signs, a bit more color in his cheeks, a steadier tone to his voice, a stronger grip when he held her hand. Caleb stayed nearby, sleeping on an old pull-out chair in the waiting area when hospital rules didn't allow him to stay in Ethan's room overnight. He never complained. One evening, Alara brought him a cup of coffee and found him staring at Ethan through the glass, a look of quiet awe on his face. "He's really my brother," he said softly, as if still convincing himself. Ethan began to regain his strength slowly, and one crisp autumn afternoon, he took his first steps outside since the transplant. Alara walked beside him as he shuffled carefully along the hospital's garden path, sunlight flickering through the changing leaves. "I forgot how good fresh air feels," he whispered, squeezing her hand. A week later, Ethan was discharged. They returned to their little wooden house on the edge of Nashville, this time with Caleb following in his old pickup truck, a permanent addition to their lives. The house felt different now, fuller somehow, like it had been waiting for this reunion all along. In the weeks that followed, Caleb became a regular presence. He and Ethan would sit on the porch in the evenings, sharing childhood memories, at least what little Ethan had of his foster homes, and Caleb filling in gaps about their mother, their early years, the siblings Ethan had never met. One evening, Caleb handed Ethan a small, worn pocket knife with their father's initials carved into the handle. "It's all I have left of him," Caleb said quietly. "I want you to have it." Ethan held it with shaking hands, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. The community of Pine Hollow sent cards, prayers, even casseroles when they heard what had happened. People Alara had never met sent notes like, "Family is everything. Hold each other close." There was something profoundly healing about strangers caring enough to reach out. It reminded Alara that goodness still existed everywhere, even in the hardest seasons. Months passed, and Ethan grew stronger. His hair began to thicken again, his laugh returned, and he started building furniture in the garage, slower than before, but with that same spark of creativity he'd always had. One evening, he pulled Alara outside to the porch where a brand-new rocking chair sat, crafted with careful precision. "For you," he said simply. Alara sat down and felt tears blur her vision as she rocked gently, the chair creaking with a familiar warmth. They welcomed Caleb into their traditions. Sunday dinners became a staple, filled with laughter and quiet gratitude. Sometimes, Alara would catch Ethan and Caleb looking at each other with those half-smiles, like they still couldn't quite believe they'd found each other. One particularly golden autumn evening, Ethan and Alara walked along a tree-lined road near Pine Hollow, hand in hand, watching leaves swirl in the breeze. Caleb was ahead of them, laughing as he carried his young niece, his best friend's daughter, on his shoulders. Ethan squeezed Alara's hand gently. "You know," he said, "I used to think being an orphan meant I'd always be alone. But I was wrong. I have you. And now I have him, too." Alara looked at him, feeling the truth of those words settle deep in her chest. "Family isn't always about blood, Ethan," she whispered. "But sometimes it is, and it's beautiful." That night, as they sat around a small bonfire behind Caleb's house, the flames casting soft glows on everyone's faces, Alara felt something she hadn't felt in so long, a calm certainty that they were going to be okay. Life had broken them down, yes, but it had also put them back together in ways they never expected. Alara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, listening to Caleb telling a story about their childhood neighborhood, and thought to herself, "This is it. This is what healing feels like." Their story had begun in despair, but it didn't end there. It ended with family, with second chances, with a brother found and a life renewed. And as Alara closed her eyes, feeling the crackle of the fire and Ethan's warm hand in hers, she realized something powerful. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, just when you're about to lose hope.